Kubrick's Universe, Episode 6, David O'Reilly. Real one. Our highly skilled team are focused on bringing you the optimal experience.
So many answers we may never know. Too many questions, get on with the show. No time for the chorus, only this verse. It's Kubrick's Universe.
Open the podcast doors, Hal.
It's Kubrick's Universe, the Stanley Kubrick podcast.
About this time, the town of Waterford was in a state of general excitement from the threat, generally accredited, of an English film crew invasion. In the summer, a gang of artists, craftsmen, actors, and technicians traveled to Southern Ireland to commence filming of the motion picture Barry Lyndon, directed by the legendary Stanley Kubrick.
First position, everyone! Quick as you can! Let's get shooting. Rain's coming in.
Okay, everyone, weather is against us here. Cue red coats. Okay, Malcolm, cue the horses.
And action!
Hey guys, welcome back. Brand new episode of Kubrick's Universe. We've got a special guest for you today, in fact, two of them. One of them is doing double duty, that's right. Mr. Stephen Rigg, our producer extraordinaire, is also doing double duty as your host today. I was unable to attend this day that we recorded. I was just so busy flossing my cat all afternoon. It's a rather laborious process. But in our never-ending attempt to exploit the US-UK connection that swirls within Kubrick's universe, I thought it was a lovely idea to have Mr. Rigg conduct this interview. We really hope you like it. We've got today for you David O'Reilly. Now, David O'Reilly is one of the leading feature film location managers in the film industry today. I mean, he's worked with many well-known directors over the years, including Christopher Nolan, Tim Burton, and Michael Mann, covering films like Inception, The Dark Knight Rises, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, and Blackhat. David's also managed locations for the Harry Potter, Fast and Furious, X-Men, Mission Impossible, and Star Wars franchises. That's right. His latest film is the new Han Solo film. Now, David's also written for various sketch shows for the BBC, as well as having won the BBC Funny Hunt Award in 2006. After spending the last 2+ decades working with some of the world's greatest film directors, David has now written and directed his own film called Kubrick By Candlelight. And it's an original story set against the backdrop of when Kubrick went to Ireland to shoot Barry Lyndon in 1973. But I'm going to turn it over to Stephen and David because I'm sure David can tell you a lot about it. We've all had a chance to see it, can't highly recommend it enough. So with all that said, Stephen, my good man, I'm turning it over to you, sir. Knock 'em dead, make us proud.
Welcome to Kubrick's Universe, David.
Hi, Stephen.
Hi.
You've certainly done your research. That's,
Thank you. Thank you. We do our best.
Fantastic.
Can you tell us what the film is about briefly?
So as you said, I suppose ultimately it's about Kubrick filming in Ireland in 1973 with Barry Lyndon. And as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure most listeners know, there's a sort of myth and a legend about his life at the time. After Clockwork Orange, he'd received death threats in the UK, etc., etc. And then the legend goes, and I suppose it's not legend, it is true. He on one night in Dublin got a phone call, a threatening phone call, and then the next day left Ireland and never came back. So that was kind of the beginning legend behind it. As it turns out, now I've met the person who answered the phone call, and it was real and it was threatening, and I would say most people think it was the IRA. But my story then is a rip-roaring comedy about the behind-the-scenes filming and how my little romantic comedy dovetails with that moment, basically. So my Carry On Lyndon, which is basically what we ended up thinking it was. I'm not sure if that'll cross over to American listeners, but it makes sense to you. Basically, an Ealing comedy set behind the scenes of a Kubrick film. Dovetails in with that moment when that phone call was made, and obviously I take a position on who made that call, if that makes sense.
Much has been written about the infamous phone call that sent Stanley Kubrick running from Ireland. History recalls that on seeing English soldiers portrayed in the fields of Ireland, the Irish Republican Army made the threatening call. But, as with most of life's moments of fear and desire, it is often matters of the heart that rule the mind.
Is that the costume department? I want you to get a message to Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick, right? Take this down. If you carry on parading our boys around the place dressed as Englishmen, we're coming for him. We're coming for you, Kubrick. Cheerio now.
Are you in a position to tell us whether the person you put in the film as being the person who answered that call, is that the actual person who did answer the call?
No, it isn't. Funny enough, the person who I spoke to about it was Michael Stevenson, who was a second AD who worked on Barry. I mean, his first job was on Lawrence of Arabia, but he's worked on The Shining, and you'll see him throughout all the behind the scenes of The Shining. So he worked on a lot of Stanley Kubrick films. But he's the guy. I think it was a makeup woman answered the phone in Dublin Castle, and then she handed it straight to Michael, and he spoke to them. And I've worked with Michael, but I've also sat and talked to him at length about it. And he was convinced that it was the Irish Republican Army. And I suppose what isn't written is that they'd already received a few bits and pieces before, so it wasn't just a one-off. There was a bit of trouble. Ultimately, as partly what the film's about is, he was in Ireland in 1973 filming a film with British redcoats, and most of the British redcoats were played by Irish soldiers.
Yeah, right.
Probably it was a contentious time to be doing that anyway.
Of course, yeah.
So Michael Stevenson was second AD on that film. My character, funny enough, I won't give it away. It is similar, but obviously it's not based on him or based on any kind of truth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right, okay, yes. Where did the idea come from? I mean, did you firstly want to make a short film and then thought, what's a good subject, and came up with a premise? Or did you think about a film about Kubrick and Barry Lyndon beforehand, and then you thought, let's develop this into a short film? Which came first?
I suppose it's a really good question, actually. I suppose, like yourself, and I'm sure like everyone listening, I'm a massive Stanley Kubrick fan. I suppose also my life, I suppose they say write about what you know. So I suppose up until that point, I've spent quite a good portion of my life on film sets. So I kind of know the shenanigans that goes on. Less so now, but that kind of idea of the traveling circus and the kind of how everyone turns into kind of hot-tempered and hot and generally hot when they're away from home. It's this very strange, childish, kind of slightly British thing where a film crew that goes away instantly becomes a kind of mad drinking.
Yes, I've experienced that myself.
I'm sure, yeah. I won't tell your wife, but it's So I've always been fascinated by that, and also I suppose I've been fascinated by the idea of something like Barry Lyndon, which is a huge fan of, is a stunning film. But I know the reality of making that film would have been people with hangovers, bacon sandwiches, smoking woodbines, block toilets, all of the kind of the grittiness of filmmaking is forgotten when you see a stunning image by John Alcott on screen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, to an audience, it kind of romanticise every aspect of it, even the filmmaking element. Yeah,
exactly. So somewhere in between all of that, I wanted to make a short film. And I thought, well, I suppose it should be about filmmaking, I suppose. And I think I'd just been reading everything about Barry Lyndon at the time, and it kind of, that finding out about that moment with the phone call gave me a kind of light bulb in the head, and I thought, well, maybe if I can bring my film towards that point, whilst making the kind of film I wanted to make, which was obviously hopefully very funny, but kind of light and romantic comedy. So somewhere in between was the moment where it kind of all came together, and it was my filmmaking past, my obsession with, well, probably, I suppose it is obsession, but with Stanley Kubrick, and then a kind of moment in my life, I suppose, where having worked on films a lot, I suppose the only way you can shut up the voice in your head which is saying, my God, aren't these being made very badly, is to go and make your own film. So
yeah,
those three aspects came together about 2 years ago, and then my 20-minute script came out of that, I suppose.
Right, cool. Yeah. So the script itself beat off 150 other scripts at the 2016 Film Offerle, is that pronounced right?
That's right.
The Short Film Award. Did this help you to get the film funded?
Yeah, so I suppose it's a weird thing. I mean, you produce films as well, I know, but we in the end we pretty much financed it ourselves. But winning that pushed us, and we received €8,000 to kind of film it, basically. And obviously €8,000 doesn't go very far anymore at all, really, for any kind of film. But certainly not for a film which is trying to set itself in 1973, but also 1770.
Yeah.
Film on location, lots of characters, old cars, horses, so very quickly that money went. But however, would we have actually gone and done it without that starter money? Probably not. So it was a great motivator in terms of getting it going, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because then we had a deadline and we had someone to deliver to, and so it was a real motivator. And whilst it had no effect on my application. My parents are from Offaly. We ended up shooting it all there, which was part of the deal. Is that you win the award and you have to shoot the entire film in that county.
Ah, right, okay.
So it was great to win. I mean, let's face it, as you say, it was 150 scripts, so they obviously liked it. And then the pressure was on. We had to make it. And then very quickly we realised it was going to cost a fortune.
Oh, so that's interesting that you had the Offaly connection. That's where the festival was, and that kind of worked in with the Barry Lyndon thing. Yeah,
pretty much. I mean, I suppose I thought it would have a massive effect on my application. So they'd go, oh wow, this is an amazing story. It's where your parents are from and where you kind of half brought up, but actually it wasn't part of the application, bizarrely. So the first time they found out was during the kind of final 8 interview. So hopefully it was accepted on the basis that it was a good script, which I think that's what it was, because I got to that stage without them even knowing. But then subsequently it's a good story, obviously, because it's me. It's almost the story of what I'm filming, which is, despite my name and my accent, I suppose I'm an Irish citizen, but I've got an Irish passport. But basically it was a British film crew coming back to a small Irish village to shoot a film about a British film crew coming to shoot in a small Irish village. So there was kind of, we were our own story at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm sure the script got to that stage because it was a great script, and it really was. I can vouch for that, having seen the film. So Brian Cox, for our listeners, Brian Cox is the narrator of the film. How did you get him on board, David?
Well, I'd say it was the very, very last thing. So it was obviously written with a narrator in mind, or written with a narrator, and I suppose it was it's a perfect character in the film to get someone famous because ultimately it's probably an hour's work. They don't have to do anything apart from talking to a microphone. So it was sort of structured that way. But then we shot the film in December of last year, so 2016. Then I went off to scout for my day job, so everything kind of slowed down, and we waited for an editor. And then, and so for a long while, I was the narrator on the film as we edited it. And we had a good list of people that we wanted, or basically we had a long list that anyone who said yes, you'd go, fantastic. So
Yeah.
and then so it was almost, I think, maybe June or May or June before the few emails went out and the timing was right, which is kind of what it always is with small money and short films. Is any number of people did actually express interest, but they were like, well, we can do it in October, and and so it was, the timing was right. We had a few deadlines to reach for festivals and things like that. So it was Brian Cox's agent said, yeah, he loves it, he'd love to do it, he can do it this Thursday, and this was like Tuesday afternoon.
Right.
You're like, okay. So we scrambled and found the guy who'd already done our sound mixing, and ADR had sort of panicked and said, yeah, we can get you somewhere at 5:00 on a Thursday afternoon. And he turned up, and as you could imagine, was just brilliant straight away. And how many takes do you ask of someone like that?
And did his narration script differ? Did he bring any personal touches to it, or did he pretty much stick with the same dialogue that you recorded?
He pretty much stuck with it. I suppose, funny enough, he hadn't seen it. He'd liked the script, and I don't think he'd fully taken on board. And you've seen it, so you'll know that it's not exactly straight narration. He has to kind of break the fourth wall and talk to some of the characters, or one of the characters.
Great moment.
And so I don't think entirely taken that on board. And then when we were in the booth, he was like, "Oh, okay, I see." And actually, that at that moment, it could have all fallen apart in the sense, it wasn't just narration, it was actually kind of acting to a certain extent. But 100% absolute pro, just completely blew it out of the park. And then actually someone saw it a few weeks back at Encounters in Bristol, and they said, oh, did you have them both? Did you have him on set, or did you have him in the same room? Or and I was like, no, it was like 7 months apart. So that's a testament to him that he made that look so easy, which is why people get good people, isn't it? They make it look easy, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, the moment where the narrator integrates with the actor on screen, that moment, it was a pretty amazing moment, actually. Not because of the gag itself as written, but the way it actually happened, and how those well, like I say, it's down to Brian who made that work at that point, because obviously the actor had done all his work already, the actor in that scene.
What was interesting is we had our first screening at Encounters Film Festival in Bristol, and of course I've seen it lots of times, and everything that might have been funny is no longer funny at all to me, and obviously, like most people who make their own artistic projects of any kind, I sort of sometimes hate it, sometimes love it. And what was bizarre was actually sitting with a full house cinema, was people laughing at that moment. And of course, it wasn't funny to me, because it's like, well, I've known forever since I wrote it that the narrator would talk to the person. And of course, for people who'd never seen it before, they were laughing at it, and I was almost offended until I realised it was no longer my film anymore. It's now the audience's film, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm glad it worked, in the sense it because there was such a big gap in between shooting it and it happening, and the way we had to do it so quickly, that it could have stumbled in some ways, but because he was so good and it didn't phase him at all, it was just, it was brilliant. It worked perfectly.
And you recorded that together. Were you present at the recording?
I was, yeah. So it was just me, Brian, and Robert, who was the sound mixer, and it was great. Yeah, just he turned up and did the business, had a great chat. And what's interesting about Brian Cox, obviously, he's known as a kind of Scottish actor, really, but he's, I would say, something like 90% Irish. So he felt very connected to.
Ah, right, interesting.
Very connected to the story, but also he's a massive Kubrick fan, massive Barry Lyndon fan as well. So, and I can't remember if he told me a Kubrick story. I think he may have auditioned or something, or seen Kubrick for Eyes Wide Shut. I can't remember if he said that. I'll have to check whether that's true or not. But whatever, he's a massive Barry Lyndon fan. But yeah, so was kind of turned on by that, also by the Irish aspect of it, which his family came over from Ireland to Dundee at the turn of the century, I suppose, last century.
Right, yeah. Good. So, what about the rest of the cast? Had you worked with any of them before, or where did you find them actually?
A few of them. I suppose the main actors, Dara O'Toole is our kind of romantic lead. He's from Tullamore, where we shot it, so there was kind of a connection. Although he is becoming a kind of very well-known Irish actor. He was in a TV series over there, which also played on BBC One in the UK, called Red Rock, which is like a sort of police station drama. And so he was kind of he is on the way up. And luckily then I emailed him and said, I'm doing a film in your hometown. Do you want to be involved? And of course he said yes straight away, which was great for us. And then similarly with Amy, who's our female lead, I had seen a thing called We're Doomed, the Dad's Army story, which was a BBC 2 thing a couple of Christmases ago but funny enough, about the making of Dad's Army. So it was another making of. And she played the main writer's secretary. And it was one of those things where you kind of make a mental note. You just go, oh, well, it'd be good if I ever do something that I can see if she's available, sort of thing. And of course, then 7 months later, I emailed her agent, and she came and met us in Dublin for an afternoon. She's English, but she's based in Dublin.
Right, yeah.
And so she came and met us, and it was one of those cliches. But the moment I met her, I thought, well, she's in. And she's turned in a fantastic performance, and hopefully she does really well out of it. And then some of the other people in the smaller roles I'd done other very tiny short films with, Mark Webb and Lisa Moore, who are kind of smaller parts in the film. And then just Phelim Drew came in and did a half a day for us, and he's a very famous Irish actor, but his dad was in the Dubliners, so he's kind of Irish royalty to a certain extent. And he came in and did half a day for us, and just kind of was incredible, and blew the room away in his half day. I suppose I put the cast together myself, really, and luckily I think they all kind of worked together, funnily enough. And I suppose ultimately that it was Dara and Amy as the lead. If they hadn't had chemistry, or you hadn't felt something, then again, it's a cliche. If you don't feel the chemistry, it won't work on screen. And I think they sort of do. They feel like a sort of hot 70s couple,
Yeah, exactly. They work perfectly well together. And it's nice when you make those mental notes, isn't it? Like you did when you saw Amy in the Dad's Army thing. And then you can pull that note out at some point and actually use it. And you're not wasting your time putting all these notes down every time.
It's true, isn't it? Because how many of them have we made that never come to fruition? And there's one that actually you go, actually, no, I do remember her, and now I can actually contact her with a project. I mean, it's sort of what you dream about those notes being able to do, you know what I mean? But so that was one of those, which is great.
Yeah. Did you have a rehearsal period with the actors? Is it something that you found to be a necessity? I mean, of course, some of this is down to budget, isn't it? Whether you can get rehearsals
it's
in.
Budget, it's budget really, and also bizarrely, then my kind of situation, which is I live in southwest London and I work here, and so going over was to film was even a big, it was basically like filming. Well, it was basically filming abroad, which is kind of what I do in a day job, but we're doing it on a tiny budget. But we did, and I thought it was essential just to kind of, because we didn't have a lot of time on set and we were racing through different scenes. I thought, well, let's at least try and do half a day in Dublin, even if it's a couple of days before, which is what we did with Dara and Amy and Mark Griffin, who came in, who's the villain of the piece. And they'd all met then since before that, and it was all so it was beginning. They were beginning to form a relationship, which was good. But I just thought, in my inexperience, I just thought the amount of time we're going to have on set, we ought to at least have a few pages under our sleeves. And some of the scenes, and you'll have seen, out of choice, because we were trying to replicate Barry Lyndon's style, we kind of ran as one shot. So that's quite a feat. It's not a feat for the crew because we just turn the camera on and go for it, but it's quite a feat for actors to do like 2 pages and move and be good as well.
A particular shot that, now you mentioned that, I'm just casting my mind back. One of the long shots that I actually picked up on there and then without a second viewing was kind of the drill instructor kind of scene.
Yeah.
That's quite a long scene. I think the guy playing Stanley Kubrick walks in on the left. In fact, exactly. I rewound that scene, actually. I don't often do that, but I rewound that scene just to re-look at that. So that's one of the long takes, isn't it? The one there that I've just described.
Yeah, that all plays out. And then I think, and when they meet in the field, it's all done in one take, and so that's really difficult for them, but it's also quite difficult for us in the edit then, because if you feel like it's lagging or something didn't work, then you've ultimately just got to choose a take. You can't get yourself out of it because you've set out to do it in one shot. So it's I learned a lot. I'll tell you, every single minute of the day. Despite how long I've been in the film industry, we learned more in the 4 days filming than I ever have, because they're choices you make on the day that you have to live with. Then
yeah.
I think they pull some of those longer scenes off, and of course that's what we were trying to do, was in 18 minutes kind of replicate some of those moments in Barry Lyndon, which are the slow zooms.
Yeah, the opening shot. Yeah,
it's 3.5 hours long, so we couldn't replicate the pace, obviously. And you've seen it. We even talk about the pace of films during the film, so we're kind of hopefully almost talking about our film not being like Barry Lyndon, because one of the characters says we need to speed it up and let's get going, because I'd obviously if we shot a 3.5 hour story about behind the scenes of Barry Lyndon, it probably would make sense, wouldn't it, to do a 3.5 hour, but yeah, so 18 minutes and a comedy.
Yeah,
you've got to keep the pace up, I suppose.
It's quite a feat. The other long take that you mentioned there, which is the one where when Amy's trying to get Dara to move further and further away from Stanley's camera, that's the other take that we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that one and the earlier one indoors with the drill instructor kind of thing. How many takes did you do with both of those?
We were under so much pressure because it was December, so it was getting dark at 2:30, 3 o'clock in Republic of Ireland at that time, early December. So the field scene, which was for me like the most complex one, because they had to keep moving and act and be funny and romantic and
the walkie-talkie element
and the walkie-talkie, and there was a lot of stuff going on, and so that was quite harsh to do, and we were running out of light, and it began to rain. Everything you could possibly imagine was happening. And I think we probably only did maybe 3 or 4 takes, which it's still a lot, obviously. But then, as I said, that means then you've really only got 3 or 4 options, which is which one do you go for, And then that was actually one of our opening bits of filming, was the drill instructor bit. Again, I think Lisa was so well prepared and knew what I was referencing, obviously, which was Arlie Emery and Full Metal Jacket. So it was kind of an easy reference for her to watch and kind of imbue that kind of attitude without swearing, obviously, massively.
Yes.
She does. So that was a few takes. We just never had time to sit and go over one. I mean, the one that we probably did the most takes of it is our opening shot, which is a big number, but that was more down to just coordinating all of those elements. So it was for people listening, and you've seen it, but it's the opening shot is trying to replicate a shot in Barry Lyndon where they're watching the marching band. And so it was a slow zoom, but it involved, I'd say, 30 or 40 extras. Some of them were marching. We had 2 horses. We had old 6 or 7 classic VW campers and cars. Stanley Kubrick has to come onto the plinth and turn the camera on, and we had first ADs moving, and so that one, in a sense, that one took more takes because there's just a lot going on. You know what I mean, in terms of getting it right and the zoom being in the right place. But actually, I hopefully that shot works. And then obviously what we did with that, because we shot it in Tullamore in County Offaly, then we visual effects the mountain, which I can never remember what it's called, but the mountain in Waterford, which they shot in front of for that scene. But yeah, so it was, we had a visual effects guy called Paddy Eason who's worked on loads of different films, and we got someone to go and take a picture of the real place. We ended up calling it Tit Hill, which is kind of, I imagine what it's called locally, but it does have a very romantic Irish name as well. But we had a few reference pictures, and then he very expertly stuck that in, made it look good, brought rain clouds coming in from the side and stuff, so it looks fantastic. We were really happy with that. Because of I suppose if we had our own money and we had no stipulations, of course the plan would have been to go and shoot in that field. That would have been the ultimate, but the stipulation was we had to shoot the whole film in that county. Yeah. So we just found a flat field with a fairly good line, if you know what I mean. So it was a kind of a matte line for us to work with. Yeah. Then luckily it kind of comes off really. I mean, it feels like we're there. Funny enough, Brian Cox, when he was standing in the studio with me, said, "Oh my God, it's fantastic! You went back to the original place." and I was like, well, if I can fool a venerable actor like Brian, then I think we've probably done a very good visual effects job.
Yes, indeed. And if you can fool a fan like me,
well, that's great. Yeah, no, I mean, and you know, there's obviously tons of things that I would have wanted to do with that. We didn't have enough extras, but I sort of factored in my head about rationalizing why it is that way, and it was take 1 of 90 takes, and you know, so. But and on a budget, what can you do? You can't have 200 soldiers. Put it that way, I suppose.
No, and the weather is something that no one ever even thinks about. I mean, I'm sure you'll know with all the location filming you've done that even the sun can stop you shooting, can't it? With the clouds, that was a surprise to me when I did my feature film a few years ago. I thought, okay, we've had snow this week. We've had rain. We've had hailstones. But we're stopping because of the sun. You know, that was an eye-opener to me.
It is like war, basically, making films. It's like you're up against all of the elements, but ultimately you're up against time. And I think, and I'll be paraphrasing it, but I'm sure there's a quote from Stanley Kubrick about what he regarded as the limitations of filming, and I'm sure it's something like the only limitations are weather and time. I think that's probably a quote from him when he had the power to shoot for 14 months. I'm sure, you're just up against it, and 4 days for all of the stuff we needed. Even though it was 20-page script, but we had so many different. We did 3 churches in 90 minutes. We stipulated that each one should only take us 30 minutes.
Okay, so Michael Thomas Nolan, he joins the ranks of actors playing a fictionalized version of Stanley Kubrick. How did you find Michael, and how do you think he did? I was very impressed with the enigmatic performance that he did.
I think everyone is. There's a website, you probably used it. It exists in the UK as well, called Star Now, and it's sort of a casting website for people I suppose without agents, but sometimes with agents, and it's just an open source kind of casting thing. And so in the early stages, I knew that we'd have to have a Kubrick. But if we didn't have a good one, then it would be very much in the background, and you would never really feel his presence. He was kind of an enigma, which would also fit the concept that you never saw him really. And then I went through this. It was as simple as difficult as putting in keywords like Dublin, actor, male, beard, and then pressing the arrow key through many thousands of people, some with beards, some women with beards, and it would go on and on. And then I found two people, and one was both from Dublin, and both had beards. And one I was like, well, you know what, I think he could work, but I would have to put him at the back and not really, he wouldn't be a feature. I wouldn't put the camera on him. The next one was Michael and Mike Nolan, and then I was like, and then there was one picture of him, and I was like, oh my god, there's the beard coming, the hairline, and I thought, you know what, I think if he grows that out a bit, I think we might actually have it. And as it turns out, he's 6'4". He's about 23 years old. But Kubrick was, I think, maybe 5'6" or 5'7". He was quite a small man. But and then during Barry Lyndon, I suppose, would have been
40s, mid-40s.
So on paper it shouldn't have worked. But then he rocked up. We put a big duffel coat on it, a big parka on him, and the beard was out. And then I felt strangely confident enough to put the camera on him directly, because he kind of did. To I suppose to us, you kind of go, well, it isn't the Kubrick that you kind of remember at that time, but actually it's pretty close, bizarrely. And so I was really lucky, and he was great fun, and he's enjoying it immensely ever since, because it's he gets recognised as Stanley Kubrick now, which is
does it? Amazing.
If he can make some money out of it, then good luck to him. But so that was the final piece of the puzzle, and actually, it was such a good piece that I actually decided to put the camera directly on him at some point. And we did have one scene which I cut out right during shooting, which was, it would have been a kind of Romeo and Juliet style scene. It's a shame because it would be quite funny, but it would have actually had Kubrick interact with Dara, the lead actor. And I suppose I'll save that for the feature film if we ever make one. But yeah, I was very happy, and I think the reaction so far to him visually is that everyone thinks we were lucky, I suppose. I mean, we were lucky. He's great and looks the part, I think.
Yeah, and beyond the beard, he's got the features. He's kind of got the eyebrows and the eyes, hasn't he?
It's just one of those bits of luck, really. Is you find someone, they want to do it, and it works, and as I say, if we hadn't, then it would have just been another thing. We would have just kept it.
It'd have been in the shadows, I guess, wouldn't it, throughout?
Yeah, and it would have been a fake beard sort of job and all of that. So we were just lucky, and it kind of worked that we could then make him a feature almost of what people are expecting. People, I suppose, the title suggests you're going to see him at some stage. So I suppose we delivered on that.
With Stanley Kubrick.
Here we are in the Lamb Club in Barrowford on a Thursday night. I'm with Mike. Mike, who is Stanley Kubrick?
He was a film director, did The Shining, wasn't 2001 A Space Odyssey one of his? Lots of other famous films. Full Metal Jacket. It was shot in North London back in the mid-80s. And my friend Kath lived nearby where it was shot. And she told me about the filming of it. How about that? Clockwork Orange, that was another of his.
Good one.
Lots of good films. Doctor Strangelove was his. Now that is an absolute classic of a movie. We call the Coca-Cola Corporation, etc. You know, they are into some very good movies.
So your producer is Vinny Jassal, who, like yourself, has been working as a location manager on some great movies, such as the Kingsman films and the new Star Wars franchise, I believe. Did the idea of Kubrick By Candlelight come about while she was working with Vinny?
Yeah, I think so. What we did, we've been working on and off together since X-Men First Class, which shot in the UK, and then we worked together on Fast and the Furious 6. So we were always talking about movies, and then what we did, and I'm not sure if you've done any of these before, but what we did was a 48-hour film challenge a couple of years before, so probably 2013. So you kind of it was a science fiction one, so you get your title, a line of dialogue, and a prop. And then on the Saturday morning, and then by the Monday morning, you have to deliver a 5-minute film. There's a good and bad thing about those. The good thing is it literally, unless you give up, it literally motivates you in 2 days to come up with something.
Yeah.
And deliver it. And whether it's good or not, it doesn't matter, because actually what it's done is just got you going. So we did one. So we decided to do one for the Science Fiction London Film Festival. I can't even remember the year now, but probably 2014. And we made one called 11 Dimensions was the title we were given. And if you you'll be able to Google it. I think it is on VMO. But it has a few little Kubrick references already in it. Actually, it's got some music. It's got the Blue Danube at the beginning. And there's a little bit of a one-point perspective at the beginning. And so it was kind of a test run, in the sense we were like, okay, let's just do one and see how we work as a team. And it did quite well, and we kind of got into a finalist, and we were then being developed to make a feature film script, at least, of the idea, which was low budget, which was low cost time travel. So like Ryanair time travel. And so that's the kind of theory behind it, and it's also the theory of, if you could go back, would you kill Hitler as a baby? So that's if you watch it, it's about that basically. And so we did that, and it did kind of well, and then we thought, okay, well, but it's not good enough to put into festivals, or you know what I mean? It's sort of it's like going for a run or something. It's like it's not competitive sport, but it's good exercise. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, it's got to be a little bit rough around the edges, I guess, with only 2 days, and it'll be watched with those kind of eyes, won't it? Expecting.
Yeah, exactly. When you screen it at the thing on the Monday or whenever they screen it, then everyone's looking at it with the idea that actually that's amazing, you did it. And we were even worse. No one could work on the Saturday, so we did it we actually shot and edited it all in 22 hours.
What?
So we actually split our 48 hours in half, and then because everyone said, "Oh, I can't do Saturday," so we rocked up to Shepperton Studios on Sunday morning. We shot in a field first, then we went to Shepperton Studios, and then me and the editor and Vinny worked on it until I suppose 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, and then handed it in the next day. So we did it in half the time, really. It's quite a simple short, but it was kind of good exercise, you know. And so I suppose what came out of that is that's brilliant. We did okay with it, and everyone quite liked it and thought it was funny. Now what we should really do is do a proper short film, which is prepped and ready to go, and then something at the end of it you go, okay, and hopefully we're lucky that it is okay, is that you feel like you can put it out to people in the industry, but also to film festivals and see what happens with it, really. So it was the 48-hour film challenge that kind of started the wheel turning, basically, to make something proper.
Can you just remind our listeners what the name of that film is again? 11.
It's called 11 Dimensions, and you'll find it on VMO. And it was actually selected at the time as Ain't It Cool website.
Oh yeah, right.
I actually liked it as one of their Saturday shorts at
wow.
the time. It's quite good fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's very simple. And to tell you how small it was, I suppose I'm the second lead character.
Right.
So Vinny was working a smoke machine. My friend Still, who ended up shooting Kubrick by Candlelight, was on one camera, and I'm because we didn't have enough people, I played I suppose the second main character, and made sure obviously I had all the best lines and got all.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you should be able to. Hopefully you'll be able to find that. If not, I'll sort the link out.
Yeah, please. Yeah, I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
Very interested in that kind of thing.
That's what started it all. And actually, bizarrely, there's a couple of little early Kubrick references in there at the beginning, which kind of give you a clue as to where we were going.
Yeah.
Without even knowing what the next project was, that was already in there. Bizarrely.
Is Vinny a Kubrick fan as well, like yourself?
He is, yeah. Probably not as much as me, but yeah, definitely, yeah. And I suppose my only regret is I left university in '97, and then I started working for a thing called the London Film Commission. And when I was working at the London Film Commission in the location library, which was my first job, they were shooting Eyes Wide Shut, and my eventual boss that I worked with quite a lot, called Nick Daubeny, as a location manager, he was working on Eyes Wide Shut, and he was one of the many location managers that went through the kind of 14-month shoot. So wow. In a strange way, I missed out on working on it. I suppose if I had entered the industry earlier, I would have probably worked with Nick, and I probably would have worked on Eyes Wide Shut. So it was kind of it literally when I was starting out, he was finishing up, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I know plenty of people that, as I said before, like Michael Stevenson and Nick, that worked with him in various capacities, and everyone always said he was fascinating, massive family man. You know, I suppose what I wanted to get away from in my film, even though he's in it a bit, is I suppose the idea that he's a kind of crackpot director, which is kind of how he's mythologized a bit, isn't he? That it's the kind of 200 takes and
I mean, in the last few, certainly in the last 2 or 3 years, I think we're getting away from that finally. I mean, people, the fans who've been reading about him for 20, 30 years have kind of twigged on quite early doors that a lot of this is a myth and legend. But now we've got the great book by Emilio.
Exactly.
And a few other books. We kind of discover. Hopefully, I mean, it's great to have all that at some point, but it's nice to get the real story as well, isn't it? It's good to find out the real man.
I think it's to do bizarrely with the internet, really. I suppose if back then there wasn't gossip, and there wasn't kind of constant information and behind the scenes videos, and so it's very easy, even for the PR departments of those films, to create a kind of buzz about the director. You know what I mean? So because there's no evidence, you know, like it's all and now everything's sort of so documented and written about that, you know, if he was around now, we'd all know whether it was true or not, because he'd have to be doing interviews, even though he didn't like doing that stuff. There'd be, you know what I mean? If that makes sense. It's kind of, everything's much more open now, because it's almost a commodity, behind the scenes and interviews and websites and, you know, Twitter accounts for directors and all of that, and Instagram.
Yeah.
So he'd be much more exposed now, which I imagine he'd probably hate, but would know that was part of the business.
Yeah,
I suppose.
That's true. I mean, I was really surprised. Recently, I was speaking to Filippo, who wrote the book with Emilio, and he told me that Kubrick actually did 300 interviews in his time, and I think Filippo's tracked all these down. They were not filmed interviews, but you know, audio interviews or straight to print interviews. I was astounded that he'd done so many. So he wasn't shy from speaking. He was just not too keen on being on the chat shows circuit.
Which, to be honest, for directors, I would imagine, unless you're that way out, is probably right anyway. I mean, it's you're kind of letting your work do the talking. Although, as you said, he obviously did enough, and I've read plenty of interviews for each film that he made, and he he was obsessed by the publicity as well. So he, in terms of he monitored millimeters of adverts in papers and stuff. So it's not like he was completely shy of it at all, really. He was actually kind of into it, I think. Actually, he was always interested about how the posters were designed and how it was, the film was going to be advertised, really. So I think, it's interesting how myths and legends start about people, and I suppose the moment you decline to do an interview, then that gives, it shouldn't do, but it gives the person who's getting declined the opportunity to create something that didn't exist.
And I suppose it didn't take long for the newspapers, particularly in Britain, to realise they could probably make as much up as they wanted to, knowing that they weren't ever getting responses from him or from the estate. So, and I suppose as long as they weren't, saying anything particularly terrible about him, which it wasn't really terrible, was it? It was just myth making.
It helps.
Yeah.
I mean, again, he was such a genius at all levels in terms of filmmaking, but also about advertising and marketing. He will have known, bizarrely, that being aloof helped him. Do you know what I mean? It's all part of the machine. He's so precise about everything else. There's no doubt he would have been precise about knowing how he was perceived helped the films. I mean, he was too clever not to know that.
That's true. I wonder if he picked up that with someone like Marlon Brando, who I suppose was someone who kind of did that a decade or two before Stanley did.
Yeah. I think it's. I suppose it's what I'm trying to think of the phrase, but I suppose if they're not talking about you, they don't know about you. I think I've totally ruined an Oscar Wilde quote. I think that.
Yeah.
So. I'll tell you what, I've got the quote for you, Steve.
Well done.
There's only one thing in the world worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about.
That's the one. Well done.
There you go, Oscar Wilde. So that's basically what I was saying.
So a good director is only as good as his producer, I believe. Did Vinny keep the cast and crew happy and provide you with everything that you needed?
Yeah, I mean, it was. There's no doubt about it. It was a tough shoot. We came with no prep. We didn't really know. We brought a few people from the UK, like Still as DOP and sound man Tim, and people that we knew came with us, but we couldn't bring everyone because we couldn't afford it. So we had a brand new crew, really, of really enthusiastic Irish, young Irish filmmakers. But it's difficult because you're just coming in late to things, and they're kind of, and also I suppose we didn't even realize how big it was going to be, but we had a slight inkling, but actually then turning up with vehicles and horses and extras and costumes is quite daunting for any new filmmaker, to be honest. And we took it in our stride in some ways because we've lived on those kind of sets, but it's different when you're paying for it all, I suppose. But he was tough. He had a tough time. There was a lot to do. I was quite tough with him because that's art, and he doesn't mind me being tough with him. but there's nothing more gut wrenching than making a piece of work, whether it's I suppose ultimately filming is the most obvious way to describe this because it's so expensive, but when it's your own money to a certain extent, it actually makes you physically ill.
Yes, I can vouch
because
for that.
Time is money, and you're literally, if something's not going right, and you'd feel bad if you're a director and producer and it was the studio's money. You would. But when it's physically your money, it's actually actually makes you quite ill. And that's difficult because then also you're trying to make a comedy. You're in charge of that creative process, so your energy has to be at a good level at the same time as all of that going on. So what I would say, and who knows what will happen next, but it's difficult. I wouldn't want to do it with my own money to such an extent because it doesn't allow you to enjoy the process, and I think for comedy at least it could be different for other kind of films. I feel like as a comedy director, I'd want to be having fun with the actors that would come out on screen, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
but
yeah, it
certainly.
does.
But I don't know whether that's. I don't know. I haven't spoken to many comedy directors about that, I suppose. But certainly, whenever you're paying for something, it's brutal when the weather's not going well or something breaks, and you just see your money disappearing by the hour or the minute.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that could happen. I suppose a director is the leader of the gang, the ultimate man responsible for everything. So perhaps even if you were working with a studio's money, for example, I'd imagine you'd still get the similar anxieties, whether it was out of your pocket or out of theirs, because you're ultimately responsible. I mean, at what point did that anxiety start to kick in? Was it once you got to Ireland?
On the plane over.
Yeah.
I was fairly. I knew it was going to be difficult. I mean, it was just we had a lot to do. You've seen it. We didn't help ourselves. We have a montage in the middle of the film. A deliberate montage because it's showing 6 months, but filming a montage on a budget is harsh because you've got maybe 40 setups that all you'll see in the film is what we shoot, in terms of it's two people walking down a road, but that's each one of those is a setup and probably a different location. So we had a lot of that to do. And ultimately we didn't finish everything, so we had to come and do one day in April of this year in Shepperton Studios in the UK because we just couldn't afford to go back. And it was funny how that was a different filming experience in the sense we were a bit more experienced. The weather was nice, the days were longer. We didn't really have dialogue to shoot. It was just stuff for the montage. And actually all of the behind the scenes of that day, I'm smiling, but all of the behind the scenes photos of Ireland, I'm incredibly serious and stony faced. Because I suppose I had to be, like, at the moment I'm not on it as a director and a producer, I suppose. Then it all falls apart, as you say, because you're the energy to a certain extent, especially on a short film or on a small film like that with no money. Is if your energy's not up, then why would anyone else's be? You know what I mean?
It's a tough job. I mean, I haven't directed much. I've been more mainly in the production capacity, but it's quite rare that you see directors laughing whilst making films.
No, maybe I'm being greedy that I want to have fun on a set, but I think you're right. I suppose I've worked with many directors, and they never look happy. So it's a lot going on. You're editing in your head whilst you're shooting, and a million different departments are asking you questions to which you have to have an answer to. I mean, on a big film like the Star Wars films I've worked on or whatever I've worked on, it's quite and so times my film by 200, it's like there's thousands of questions coming at you. Excuse me. And you've got to have an opinion, you've got to have an answer, definitive answer, and each answer you give costs £10,000, £100,000, £1 million. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I can see the pressure. I know one director on one very, very big film who got sick every single day, and it wasn't his money. But the pressure of having on a big film 200 or 300 people standing there at 7 o'clock in the morning going, "Okay, Gov, where do you want it?" That's quite a lot of pressure, isn't it? And then you've got the pressure of what you're doing being good as well. That's the actors rock up, and if you've cast it right, then you're halfway there because they'll be able to do the business. But the pressure of the physical act, but then also knowing that it's got to be good. Most of the crew don't care whether it's good or not. They want to know where to put the light or where, you know what I mean? Like there's a kind of physical act of filmmaking that goes against the actual spiritual act, which is you're trying to make something beautiful, funny, romantic, or whatever it is you're trying to do, thrilling or scary. So the pressure's on for the director and the producer, I suppose, and DOP. Those the glamorous big jobs are in those big films well paid because there's a lot that has to go. A lot goes on. You know what I mean? Like it's on a Star Wars film. We start sort of 18 months before we start shooting in the location department, but the director will have already been on it, certainly if he's writing the script as well, 6 months before that. So you're talking almost about 2 years to make those films, and you'll be asked questions from what color do you want this glass to, do you want to spend £5 million on this, or but everyone, and it's your decision. I mean, there's a lot more people involved in the decision, but ultimately the director is the king to a certain extent.
It sounds like there's certainly two very different hats to be worn, which is the creative one, which everyone thinks that is the big part of it, but you really have got half your head's got to be in kind of logistics and real world situations rather than the creative dreamy stuff. You've got to be in both places, haven't you, constantly?
And then I suppose very easily going back to Stanley Kubrick, who was someone who clearly could do all of that, and never appears to look like he broke a sweat over it. But he had at some stage, I suppose after 2001, had such power with Warner Brothers that he was afforded almost carte blanche in terms of time and sometimes budget, and that comes from obviously being an amazing filmmaker, but still having all of that in your head. And I've only seen 2 or 3 other directors really doing that. Michael Mann, who is a massive Stanley Kubrick fan, and Christopher Nolan, who's a massive Stanley Kubrick fan. So it's strange that the 2 other people I've worked with that I felt similarly had everything going on in terms of producing, because both of them are producers. They're also both writers, but they're directors, and make films that are very, you would almost say, kind of Kubrickian in some ways, in terms of emotions and kind of and style. I have very similar ways of directing, really, which is that they've got everything going on. They're 2 steps ahead of everyone, which I suppose is what is the difference between these amazing directors and me. But genuinely, those 2, and anyway, even if I hadn't worked with them, you'd probably go, those 2 are probably modern day Kubricks in some ways, if there is such thing, and there probably isn't.
Yeah.
But in terms of just complete control over the whole process, it would be those 2 really. And I suppose I've been lucky enough to work with them and see them do that.
Yeah, I suppose to some extent, Stanley made it easier for himself, being in that same position as a producer and a collaborator on the script and everything, just like the guys you've just mentioned. I suppose he made it easier on himself because he extended his pre-production time, so he could kind of get involved with everything and answer most of these questions that come up during the shoot and have all the answers ready, if not everything put in place already. So I suppose that's one of the reasons why he did spend a lot of time in pre-production.
Yeah. I mean, I experienced this in my day job anyway. I work mainly in pre-production really as a location scout, because it's all up front and then they find it and you're done, sort of thing. But that's for me, even when I made my own film, then the best bits were pre-production and then post-production. Production itself is just a slog, and it's almost like an organized slog in the sense you've got to make the day, as producers say, which is make sure you get everything you need on the list and it's done, and then you go home and then you come back the next day and do it again. But actually pre-production is where the film's kind of perfect, because it doesn't exist, and all the good stuff happens. You develop the script, you meet the actors, you start getting the costumes ready and everything. That's a really fun bit, and obviously I work in that bit, so I'm a location scout, so you go off and you explore and then you come back and then you go with the director and the designer, and everything's kind of quite fun. And then the shoot is just brutal, even on big films, but even more so because it's just massive. And then post-production on my one was great fun. We had great fun in the edit suite, because it's where the film comes alive, and you can change the whole film if you're lucky enough to have enough footage, which we didn't. But you can change the whole film. You can change the whole theme of the film, really. And the music comes in, and visual effects and sound effects, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is better than I thought it was going to be. But production is just is war, basically. And I'm sure Stanley Kubrick's probably on record of saying something similar. But as you say, because he had so much time, and people don't have as much pre-production time anymore, certainly not at the scale he had. So what they have now is a release date. That they work backwards. So everything's a panic, and the time that gets crunched is the pre-production time. So even though I'm saying the Star Wars films are so long pre-production, but that's the time that gets crunched. That's where your film is made to a certain extent, because you get everything on paper. You start to accumulate all the notes, and as you say, that's what Kubrick was doing. So when he turned up on day one, even though his films took forever, he kind of knew his film already inside out. I think Hitchcock was exactly the same. It was just like, basically, by the time you turn up on day one of the shoot, you should almost be finished with it to a certain extent. It's literally check off the list as you go along, and then allow the magic to happen as it goes along if you're lucky.
Yeah.
But so I've always, even, and in my experience of Kubrick by Candlelight, was pre-production was fun, even though we were low budget. Post-production was fun, and then production was just like a trench warfare.
Good thing that's the shortest part in the out of the three, isn't it? Exactly. I suppose. Yeah, right. So you said that the film was set in 73 and to a certain extent 1770, because that's the setting of the film within the film. So in terms of costume and set design, how did you manage to get what you needed? Period films are notoriously expensive and very challenging.
I suppose it was even going back to the first question in some ways, part of the fourth element of my decision to do it was because we work on big films, we wanted to make a big film, and we wanted to show that it didn't necessarily have to cost 10 million or 100 million or two, you know what I mean? But however, it was quite expensive to do. But actually, funny enough, the stuff that is up on the screen that's good, like locations and sets, costumes and stuff like that, were probably and cars cost the least. All the locations were free, as you'd expect with our kind of pedigree, getting those free. But of course, it was then in the hometown of my mum and dad, so I could call on favors, and we got a castle for free, and we got this and that for free. And so actually, the really good stuff, like the vehicles, I did a radio interview and asked for vehicles, and the next day I had 40 emails, and so we had 6-7 people came from all over Ireland in their vans, slept in their vans and rocked up and were extras in the film and came back the next day. And so all of the really good stuff, costumes, some of it we got for free, and then some of it we had to hire, but not massively expensive. Funny enough, the expense is all of the stuff you don't see, which is hotels, transport. As a producer, it's the brutal reality of making the film is the cost, is wages, travel,
and feeding.
And you can't make your film without those. But as a producer and a director, they're the things you think, well, I'm never going to see that on the screen, and you don't. So we were lucky. So the good stuff, all of the I had it, because of where it was, I had a good idea where I wanted to shoot it. So we filmed in a beautiful castle in the town called Charville Castle, which was kind of faded grandeur, I suppose is the old way to say it, because it doesn't really exist in the UK in the sense we would national trust it, so it would be sparklingly clean. But it's kind of a lovely old castle, and we used it almost every single room. And the people who ran it, Dudley and all of the guys, were fantastic and let us just get on with it, really. And then we filmed outside in the field, and we filmed in the town, we filmed in a pub, we did the free churches. Then we recreated Dublin Port behind an old brewery, an old distillery in the middle of the town. Obviously, there was no water or anything. Well, there was a canal near it, but there wasn't the Irish Sea. So we shot everything in that small town, basically. So the good stuff, was not easy to get, but bizarrely was the free stuff. If you were to sit down and say, what would you want to do for your first real short film, you wouldn't go, I want to set something in the 1970s 1970s about a film crew shooting a 1770s film, which is known as the most beautifully costumed and made up film in history. You wouldn't necessarily put it on your first list of let's do that. But that was part of our remit in some way, which was to kind of challenge ourselves to make a big short film, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it certainly does come across as being very authentically 70s with the setting of that period. Did you go the whole hog and get in touch with NASA to borrow a lens?
You know what, we didn't, but those lenses are around, and our cameras all came from Arri Rental in the UK, and I'd have to check this, but I think at some stage Vinny had access to the actual lenses, but they don't work on the Alexas, the Arri Alexas that we had to shoot. But apparently they're either in the UK somewhere, or they were achievably rentable, bizarrely. I think maybe they were in Germany or somewhere like that. But of course, I suppose the weird thing is now, 40 years on, you now, the cameras are so good that you could shoot by candlelight, and it wouldn't be record-breaking lenses that you'd need to do it. Amazingly, now you could shoot candlelight on your iPhone. It's so in a weird sort of futuristic way of moving on from Barry Lyndon and Stanley Kubrick, we were shooting it very similarly without just candlelight and with a what now is kind of a standard digital camera, really. So we didn't have to get the NASA lenses, although we sort of toyed with the idea. Just to say we had them, I suppose, would be the cool thing, wouldn't it? But yeah, so I would have loved to have got a hold of them, but we probably would have been very worried we would have broken them or something.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether I've heard that Kubrick, once he borrowed the lenses, whether they were his to keep or whether he had to send them back. But it sounds like the lenses he borrowed are still in the UK, by the sounds of it.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I can't remember what happened, but because I can't imagine they are around. But because you'd think they'd be,
unless they're in the travelling exhibition. I can't just think there are a bunch of lenses.
Oh yeah, I funny enough, as part of the experience of Kubrick by Candlelight, I went to Krakow in Poland to the exhibition when it was there.
Right.
Then after that, I suppose it spent time in the US and Mexico. Now I believe it's back in Europe in Copenhagen.
Yeah.
But I do remember there was a huge amount of lenses there. But I can't remember the story. But there was some. I think we almost got hold of something anyway. But I'll stick with that story because it's quite.
Yeah.
Whether it's true or not, it's a good story.
So the big question is, how many candles?
Well, I think we've had something in the region of, I'd say 200 or 300, maybe more, of varying sizes. And yeah, so because obviously you've seen it, but obviously our comedy angle is about part of the village deciding to steal candles to sell back to the film crew, which all of that's completely made up. So we had a kind of fair amount. So we had massive ones. The biggest one we have, I've still got it here actually somewhere, is like a meter long or something crazy. It's like a church candle. And then in the montage we have a kind of build up of candles to kind of suggest they're stealing lots. And so it's amazing how many you need to actually make that look good. You need thousands, bizarrely, but we only had hundreds. But we still had quite a few, and I can tell you they're all under my desk right here.
Well prepared for the next power cut by the sounds of it. Have you got some matches handy?
Yeah, that would be the thing. I need a producer, you see, for the matches. You see, I've only got the candles, so it's something all. But I'm ready. I'm almost the sort of Kubrickian survivalist. I've got my candles ready for a very, very beautifully lit room when the end of the world comes.
Yes, I believe there are around 90 Kubrick references in the film. I'm sure I noticed maybe half of them when I was watching it. I weren't actually looking for Kubrick references, but I just kept spotting them with being a Kubrick fan. How many of these references were planned prior to the shoot, and how many just came along on the day?
Quite a few were planned, and then some came on the day, and then some to get to 90. Some I actually almost spotted after the fact. Bizarrely, I was like, "Oh well, actually, that's a bit like The Killing." And, so some of them are very obvious. There's Flying Candles, a la 2001. There's obviously a costume woman who's like the Full Metal Jacket drill instructor, and but then even in the credits at the end, certainly for the first 5 or 6 panels, each one is in the style of a different Kubrick film. So I'm in the Barry Lyndon font, and then there's Dr. Strangelove font, and so there's ones like that. And my favourite one, and you won't have spotted it, is in the credits.
Got it. I better know it. Was it The Hair by Leonard?
Yes, there you go.
That was my favourite. I'm going to just mention that before you did.
I'm so glad you spotted it. That's my favourite, because we were doing the credits, and the credits were like really hard work because we had to make sure everyone got a mention. And then I thought, oh, you know what? I've always liked that credit in Barry Lyndon. So I thought I've got to have that. So that's my favourite one of all of them. But there's the shining carpet in various places. There's the key fob from The Shining in one scene.
Didn't spot that. Oh, did I? Is that quite hard to spot?
I'd say it's quite hard to spot. Yeah, it's when there's a scene in the montage where Amy is running down the corridor into her room, and she's wearing the shining socks.
Yeah.
She's got the key fob in her hand, and she's got it placed so you can see a room 237.
Maybe I did see that, although I'm now getting a bit confused with I saw quite a few of the production photos on your Facebook page. Maybe I picked it up there subconsciously. I
just think what my other favourites would be, really. But obviously, aside from huge amounts of Barry Lyndon references in the sense of the script and the kind of the zooms and some of the scenes and the characters, then I suppose another one I favourite is the fake newspaper we've got with some sort of Irish terrorist news, and then on that there's an advert for Calumet.
Is there?
And which I think you'd be funny enough. You'll struggle to see it in the film, but actually I know for a fact, because I've got the paper here, that we did do the advert. But the headline at the top of the newspaper is the headline from Clockwork Orange: a cure for something boy, or something like that. I've got it here. Exactly. It is Storm over crime cure boy is the headline on the Irish Post, and then there's an advert for Calumet baking powder in the corner.
Nice.
And actually I tell you what my favourite is, and our Paddy, our visual effects guy, is a massive Kubrick fan, so he was up for every single one of these. Is that we had our blue car, which is our kind of getaway car for stealing the candles. Its real registration was VIP8. That was the car. That's what it turned up with. And Paddy changed it to I'll have to remember now. He either changed it to POE 114 or CRM 114, which obviously both are Kubrick references from different films. So so we visual effects the license plate for a split second, purely for Kubrick nuts, who hopefully will, when it eventually ends up where you can just watch it online or wherever, you can just sort of try and get your 90. So I've got the list somewhere. I've listed the 90, but some of them are very. You'll go, okay, you've retrofitted that, but some of those are very deliberate. So that was my second favorite. First favorite is Leonard, and then second is visual effectsing the license plate.
Brilliant. Well, yes. Don't tell us any more, because I'm sure there'll be more than myself who wants to spend a nerdy hour stopping and writing a list out of what I can find, and it'll make a great competition at some point.
I know, absolutely.
You spoke briefly about the post-production process. Was there any particular problems during that post-production process? And how long was it, in fact? How long did you say it took from getting the footage finished to
Well, I suppose we finished in December, and then Christmas happened, so nothing happened. And then by January, I was off scouting for the Han Solo film, which was the day job. And then we had a couple of editors, and they started and they couldn't finish. They got other jobs, and so we were in that kind of post-production hell then of kind of never finishing it. It looked quite bleak at one stage. It was like February, March. We were like, it's never going to finish or start the finish, because people would start and then they weren't available. And then we, I think maybe in March, we met Ben Leach, who became our editor, and he was amazing, a great Kubrick fan as well, and mainly does music videos and commercials and really cool stuff like that. So, but we really wanted to get into narrative editing and stories, and then he took it on and just started cracking away at it. And actually, it was quite simple to edit in the sense we didn't have a huge amount of footage because we couldn't afford it, and we didn't have the time. And also, it was quite a linear production in the sense that, it was quite well scripted, I suppose, and quite storyboarded. So it was quite lean for budget reasons, but also just the way I shot it. It was just I only needed what I needed to a certain extent. So editing took a few weeks, and then we'd go and look at something, and then it wouldn't work, and I'd go off maybe, and then he would be only available the next week, or So funny enough, those blips in time actually helped the process, because you leave it for a bit and you come back and you watch it, and then all of a sudden, so there's a fight in the film, and with the first time we edited the fight, it was really well edited, but there was something wrong with it, and it took me a couple of weeks just sort of thinking about it, and it just wasn't funny. So we recut it so it looked shit. It looked like one of those sort of Bridget Jones fights, So it wasn't. They're not good fighters, So because editing can make anyone look great. So good editing of a fight sequence makes it look like these guys are two John Waynes fighting each other. And actually, what we wanted was two Rowan Atkins fighting each other.
Yeah, and it does come across that way. So, but you actually shot it less Rowan Atkinson, did you? That kind of came in the edit.
How we shot that bizarrely is they just fought, and we left still in the room with the camera and the grip, and they just fought for X amount of minutes, and we shot it 4 or 5 times. So then I thought, well, what I'll do is then I've just got enough to make a crazy fight. But as I say, so then when we edited it was, we took the crazy out of it, and actually it was a good fight. So things like that in editing were fascinating, where you just kind of abandon something and then come back to it, and then obviously the montage was almost like a pop video in itself, and that was great because he hit, we had this great track, and he just hit the beats of that constantly, and you can kind of see in the film, even though it came out long after, it almost has a sort of Baby Driver effect, because he literally uses the music as the cuts, and like the clapperboards on screen are cutting to the music, and so that was great fun. And then the music obviously was a massive part of that post-production. Really, my cousin Gavin Cowley was the music supervisor, and so he brought together his cousin, bizarrely, so I suppose that's my second cousin, Ewan Cowley. So he produced some of the music, original music, but then obviously some of the music from Barry Lyndon, some of it which is completely free, obviously, like Sarah Band and things like that. We could obviously, as long as we played it ourselves. So we had a great music session in April or May, I think it was May of this year, where we went to Dublin to this amazing studio, and all of these incredible musicians came in by the hour, with a Bowron drum or a violin or a viola, or it was amazing. And then slowly but surely all of this kind of music came together. And then I suppose our story within that was that the music I really wanted to use was Women of Ireland, which was written for Barry Lyndon by Sean O'Reada, and played by Chieftain. And then that became the love theme of Barry Lyndon. So we got permission to use that music, and then I approached Sean's son Pader to play on that track. So it was kind of, I suppose doesn't make any difference, but there's a kind of real sense of Barry Lyndon history in the sense his son plays on his dad's own track from Barry Lyndon. And then we needed 70s music, and I went down the road of approaching all the big companies and asking, I had a couple of tracks in mind, and I had one track in mind for the montage, and got down the road with it, and it was like reasonably priced, and I thought, okay, it's so good, I'll get it.
What was that?
It was a Whiskey in the Jar by Thin Lizzy. So it was perfect 70s Ireland, but cool. And that was looking kind of good. And I thought, oh wow, okay, this will be amazing. And then it got really expensive. And then I went, okay, forget it. So we were in a mix then, really, in the sense we would either have to create our own 70s track, which sort of sounds easy, but for it to be authentic is quite difficult. Like without it sounding like a sort of piss take, you know what I mean? And what we were trying to do was make it feel like it was a 70s movie, you know what I mean? And then I think one night Gavin emailed me and said, I found these guys on YouTube called Cromwell, and they were a three or four guys from Ireland in the early to mid 70s, did one album, and he sent me the first track, which is Down on the Town. And I was like, it's fantastic. And then we started editing to that, which is a dangerous thing to do, because you kind of go, now I love it. It's in. So I found Patrick Brady, who was the guy who was the head of the band at the time, but now is kind of the band to a certain extent, in the sense he owns the music, and he now lives in Sydney, and still a musician. And I said, we really love your track. We'd love to use it. And he instantly said, I'd love you to. Thank you very much. And so that was amazing. And then we and I suggest listening to the album. It's a great piece of 70s rock.
Has that been re-released on CD? It's not that rare. Is it a total rarity that you had to get digitized off a vinyl? Or
it was for a while, and then bizarrely, I think 2 years ago, and that's not how we found it. Some company in Dublin has remastered it and re-released it, I think. But we used their original. So when you listen to it, certainly when you're in the cinema, you'll really hear the crackle. So it's really off the record. And then we thought, well, it would be nice to have a track at the end of the film. And of course, then they had another track that I really liked, which was called The First Day, which kind of fit the theory of how it ends, that it's only the beginning of something. And so we got these two amazing 70s, authentic 70s tracks, with the guy's blessing, and hopefully, if our film does well, hopefully people will go, who the hell are Cromwell, and look into their back catalogue. But they had a great album. It's really, really fun.
I'll look out for them. Yeah, I like to investigate things I haven't heard before. You visited Chiddickborough, the home of Kubrick's family, in the summer this year, I believe. It was Stanley's wife Christiane's art fair, which I believe she does every year. Did you tell the family about the film? Are they aware of the film?
They are aware of the film, yeah. Because I'd met Michael Stevenson, the second AD, and I know him relatively well through work. He gave me Jan Harlan's email and phone number, and he said, and this was back in November, I suppose, or October of last year. And he said, just let them know about it, and I don't think we're ever looking for any kind of endorsement, but it was like, just to let them know. I suppose ultimately maybe he was worried that because he didn't know entirely what we were up to, whether it was going to be a piss take or derogatory about Stanley, or which obviously it certainly isn't. And I think, if nothing else, it's like a love letter to Stanley Kubrick films.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So I did get in contact with Jan, and he never really replied. And then more recently, I think I emailed him again, and I just said, it's sort of happening now, and it's coming out, and he replied instantly and said, I'll have a look at it. And so he has had a look at it, but he never replied beyond that. And again, I'm sort of mildly happy with that, to be honest, because they're rightly so, they're very protective of the brand of Kubrick now, and rightly so. But also, there's nothing in it that would make them go, I can't. I don't want to ever see this again. I mean, I suppose in some ways there's probably nothing they could do, but also hopefully if they saw it, and I think Jan probably has seen it, that would offend them really. I think it paints him quite nicely, and also ultimately it's kind of bizarrely not really about him. I suppose it's about his films definitely as a theme, but also it's sort of a love story. And hopefully a funny one. So I can't imagine. And from what I heard about Stanley, he had a very, very, very keen sense of humour. So who knows? He might have even found it quite amusing. But it's definitely not a documentary. Put it that way. So it's not.
No, for sure.
That's why I suppose at the beginning I said to you, was it what you're expecting? Because some people I've met have gone, "Oh, is it about literally the making of Barry Lyndon?" And I was like, "Well, it's not really. It's about his films as a reference, but also it's about film crews generally, but also it's as I say, like an Ealing comedy, hopefully, is what I've tried to make. I think they're aware of it. And I had great plans when I went to the house for the art fair to kind of bump into one of them and go, I'm that guy. In the end, I didn't do that. I had a very nice time there. It was a fantastic event, I have to say, and really family orientated, which reminded me constantly about what Kubrick was like. He had a great family and lots of pets and loved his house, and so that kind of reminded me a bit of him as a person, really, that he isn't or wasn't like the even if he created his own persona, or the press did, he was quite funny, had a big family, loved his family, and loved pets and all of that kind of thing. So you kind of appreciate the man slightly more when you're in his house, around his house, bizarrely, because it was a very family orientated event. But yeah, so anyway, as long as I don't get an email saying don't ever show it again, I'm quite happy.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of other things out there that are going to get that call before you do.
Yeah, good.
You showed the film at Encounters in Bristol.
Yes.
In September. What was that like? I suppose, well, that'll be the first premiere because it's the first film you've made. So how did that go?
It was good. It was nerve-wracking, bizarrely. I was quite nervous. It was a great experience. Like, we met lots of people, and obviously there's lots of filmmakers there. I felt incredibly old because most of the filmmakers were in their 20s. But yeah, it was really good fun. And our screening wasn't until quite late, so it was quite a long day of other stuff, other screenings and meetings and workshops, and then kind of building up to kind of watching it, really. And then, as I say, it was kind of a weird out of body experience, really. We were the second film in that sort of that night, so it was probably 10 or 12 films, I think, and we were the second one, so at least we didn't have to wait until the end. But yeah, it turns out it comes on the screen, and you get incredibly ill thinking about it, and then I sort of almost, luckily, people started laughing at various pieces, and then you kind of come out of yourself slightly thinking, now I can just listen in and see what people are laughing at and what they're reacting to, what they're not reacting to. So it was fascinating, and I love the fact that it was finished then by the second film, so I could actually enjoy watching the rest of them. But it was great. It was really exciting, and then bizarrely the next day we just received, just by coincidence, lots of other festival acceptances, really. So lots of Irish film festivals the next day, not because of Encounters, but just the way the dates stacked up, kind of emailed the next day and said, yeah, we've accepted you. So it was kind of quite a buzzy 24 hours, really.
It's not that easy to get into film festivals. I mean, there's a lot of festivals out there, as you know, but not that easy to get in there.
It's really it's a whole talking about learning stuff. I mean, it's even more of a learning curve now, because I've never done this. I mean, I suppose I've been on a film set and I've made a couple of short films, so I suppose I can make a short film, I suppose. But I've never entered a festival, and I don't know the politics and the process, and so it's been it's been quite even more brutal than the filming, bizarrely, this bit, because then you're putting it out there to who knows who, and they can decide within a second whether they like it or not, because it's completely subjective to the style of the festival, or whether they like comedies, or whether they're in a good mood that day, or you know what I mean. There's so many variables, and I suppose it's the same process of putting a film out there to be bought. You don't know who, you don't know if they're going to go for it. You know what I mean? So we've had lots of rejections, and and there's probably different reasons for that. Some of them might be they don't like it, as simple as that. And some of them might be because it's quite long, which is quite hard to program 18-minute short films. Because the theory being is, something like a 20-minute short film, you're losing potentially 3 other films.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we're up against that a bit. Since being at Encounters, we've met people from film festivals saying they tend not to like to program films about movies because it looks a bit incestuous.
Yeah.
But at my counter to them was most of the people who go to film festivals are filmmakers. So
yeah,
what a better audience is there? But saying that, we are now picking up a sort of bit of steam in Ireland, which you'd expect. Obviously, you should expect it to kind of at least strike a chord there because of the subject matter and the time the time it's set, and also the Irish actors. So it's sort of, we've got a little run in October of this year where we've got one every weekend for 4 weekends, which is great.
Right.
Not very good for my liver if I try to go to all of them.
For your liver? Why does it always involve hurting your liver?
It seemed to in Encounters, because what I noticed about film festivals just by doing that one was the work, and it's quite it's work is the networking and the meeting and inevitably drinking, but not always. But that's actually the work is kind of getting the film out there, making the connections, reminding people that it's on tonight or tomorrow night, and then afterwards saying, "Did you see it? Do you want to meet up next time?" So I realised that was actually that's the graft of film festivals, is kind of getting the card out there. Certainly when a big one like Encounters, there was film festivals there looking for films, so you have to make sure you meet those people and you make sure they either see it in the cinema or they can go and watch it in a booth or something like that. And so we made some good connections on that basis, but we were kind of making it up as we go along, because now we will learn to bit. We realise it's all about the card in the hand, and kind of which is that's an art in itself, networking. I'm not naturally disposed to kind of going up to people across the room, but that is the job. Literally go across and go, "Hello, I made this film. Who are you?" So I imagine that's going to be similar in Ireland on a smaller scale, I think, but also just naturally there's going to be lots more alcohol there.
Yes. The Guinness, etc. And that's the Kerry Film Festival and the Offline Film Festival. They're the ones coming up in October, I think, aren't
exactly.
they?
So Offline is a special screening because that's the Offaly Film Festival, so that's where it was shot. So it's kind of a nice place for us to start the run, really, with a special one-off. And then we go to the Kerry Film Festival, where we're nominated for Best Irish Narrative, which is exciting. And so by the time this probably goes out, we're very unlikely to win it, but it's quite nice to have the nomination. And then after that, we go to a film festival called the Richard Harris International Film Festival, which I'm really excited about because I've been a long fan of Richard Harris, and this is a film festival created in his honour, I suppose, but also managed by Jared, his son, and some of the family. So that's going to be exciting. And then we go to the Waterford Film Festival, which is very small, but of course Barry Lyndon was shot in Waterford, so it has a kind of special resonance. It's where that mountain is. So I'm not sure if I can afford to go to every single festival, but I'll try, because that's the fun bit, I suppose, where the film's out and you can kind of gauge how it's going down, I suppose.
Yeah. Have you got any plans to get the film seen wider than the festival circuit? I suppose it's a bit difficult getting a short film out there on DVD, etc. That's not something that really happens. But is there plans to, do a release online at some point? I think so. Yeah, I think because of what we talked about,
hopefully it's got a kind of, it's got, and we look, but there's no secret about it. We hooked onto an amazing brand. Also, it's Kubrick will draw people in, but I think there's fun to be had in it in terms of, even as you say, spotting the references, and hopefully it's quite a fun film. So I suppose how the process seems to work is you spend some time getting the film out to festivals, and sometimes that doesn't work at all. It just depends how your film is. There's lots of very successful short films that didn't do well at film festivals and then make money online or on or even on airlines, bizarrely. And like there's loads of other little ways of getting the film out there. So I suppose we're just going to see how it goes with the festival run, and if it doesn't really happen, then we start to think of other ways, because you can, the whole world has changed, isn't it? You can put your own film on iTunes and see what the response is, and you never know, you could have a hit on your hands. And
of course there now is a revenue for shorts, isn't there, with the old with the downloads? Of course there is. And I don't think it's not going to change your life, but it's also just a different way of getting the story out, I suppose, isn't it? And so I suppose one step at a time. We'll see how it goes over the next few months, and then see whether there's really anywhere. I'll put it this way: we're not going to make our money back, and I don't think anyone ever expects to do a short film, if indeed on any kind of film, to be honest. But it's about getting awareness of the film, but also then ultimately getting the next film, which that might be. So hopefully someone would see that film and go, okay, well, you sort of seem to have cracked that with very little money. I wonder if you could deliver 90 minutes for a little bit more money. Yeah. Well, you've certainly cracked it. It's a film that will stand up against any film of it's a high quality film. There's no doubt about it. Kubrick by Candlelight. It doesn't feel like a lot of short films can suffer from the old low budget student film kind of thing, but yours is absolutely on the top level of short films. There's no doubt about it. It's a very well made film. It's great. You should be very proud of that. Very good.
Put that on the poster, Stephen. Thanks for that. it'll be a big poster, but it'll be one of those ones where it has the three dots in between, where clearly said something bad about the film.
In the middle.
It was the best film I've seen this year.
About Stanley Kubrick filming Barry Lyndon. Yeah,
exactly. But we tried our best to kind of make it as movie-like, I suppose, is what our remit was. Just like it felt like something from the 70s, but also just kind of like one of those big old-fashioned kind of movies, which is what we like to watch. And I know exactly what you mean about, because I haven't really been to many film festivals. So, and I think if I had been, I might not necessarily have made this film this way, if that makes sense. Because even being at Encounters and now watching a few more online, the budget forces you to tell a certain story, which is relatively small scale, and it's no joke, really. I suppose it has to be kind of kitchen sink level of story. It has to be, because you haven't got much time, you haven't got much money, and I suppose and that's what goes into film festivals. So it kind of is this sort of vicious circle. That's what gets programmed, because that's what there's a lot of, and then the people who go to see it are the people who made it, so that sells tickets, and so it kind of goes on, and that's I've only discovered that since. I think if I'd been to lots of them, I probably wouldn't have made Kubrick by Candlelight. I would have been scared that we wouldn't have done any business with it.
Yeah,
because it's funny, which is hopefully it's funny, but that's not necessarily what film festivals like. They don't like to program comedy in the main, because it's a tricky one, because sometimes you're getting, if people are coming in to see 10 films in 90 minutes, you're safer with drama than you are with comedy. I think seems to be. I think in a strange way, I'm glad we made the film we made, but bizarrely I probably wouldn't have made it. I probably would have, if I knew the film festival circuit like I'm beginning to learn now, I probably would have made something very, very straight-laced and beautiful about the making of Barry Lyndon. And then it might not have been what I wanted it to be, and probably wouldn't be true to myself and what I like to write and what I like to watch. And so on that basis, I suppose, who knows what will happen to it, in the sense it'll either take off or it won't, because of the length and the comedy angle. But in some ways, who cares? We made it.
Okay. Thank you big time to David and Stephen. We spoke to David on the 4th of October, 2017. Keep your eyes out for David's film, Kubrick By Candlelight. I believe David is currently looking at a wider release beyond the film festivals. During our interview, you heard 2 tracks from Barry Lyndon, which were commissioned and re-recorded by David for the film. The first was Saraband, written by George Frideric Handel, and the second was Women of Ireland, written by Sean O'Riordan of The Chieftains. We also played Down on the Town from the brilliant 70s Irish band Cromwell from their 1975 album At the Gallop, which is reissued and now available once again. Of course, seek out the original Stanley Kubrick film Barry Lyndon, of which David's film was inspired. The Criterion Collection has recently released a fantastic version on DVD and Blu-ray. Thanks to Mike from Nelson for telling us who is Stanley Kubrick. And of course, thanks to our guest host, the inimitable, supercalifragilistic, superfantastic, mega-talented, and all-around lovely Stephen Rigg. Also a big thanks to mis compañeros James Marinaccio and Stephen Rigg for keeping the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society on Facebook running smooth as warm butter on a bedsheet of toast. Hey, please don't forget to rate and review us whenever you listen to our podcast, as we very much want to know what you think, guys. Even drop us a message at SCAS. In our next episode, we will be chatting with film producer Adam Rakoff about his Full Metal Jacket Diary app, which he developed with Matthew Modine. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode of Kubrick's Universe, and thanks so much for listening. I'm your host, humble narrator, and horrible impersonator of an amalgam of English accents, Jason Furlong, wishing you and yours a very lovely dose of warm sunshine and question mark rays. So until next time, thanks for tuning in. See you on the flip side. And till then, mis amigos, amici me, meine Freunde, mes amis, my druzia, my friends, see you out in the universe. Tati bye.
It's Kubrick's Universe. We just live in it.
We have taken very thorough precautions in this podcast against broadcasting anything which might only be attributed to human error.
Thank you for listening to the Stanley Kubrick Podcast. Come back soon.